17. You were asked a series of questions about whether this is appears to be a trained Minneapolis neck restraint.
Yes, I was asked that.
And you said no,
No.
correct?
Correct.
But it is, you had hedged a little bit and said it may be some other training.
Perhaps.
What would that training be?
Using body weight to control. However, I will add that we tell officers to stay away from the neck when possible, and if you're going to use body weight to pin, to put it on their shoulder and be mindful of position.
All right. If we can take this down, and just to the witness, I'd like to display a couple of This is page 41 of Exhibit 126. Just show this to the witness. Can you see that, sir?
Not yet.
Oh, sorry. Oop, this is already in evidence, but in this bottom corner here, do you see a photograph of an individual demonstrating how to handcuff a person?
Yes, sir.
And that knee is across the neck of that individual, correct?
The knee is on his far shoulder.
Across the neck, the base of the neck.
The shin would be from his toes up to the knee. Yes, the shin is across the back of the neck.
So that's when we're talking about prone handcuffing. This is a specific kind of photograph that demonstrates the placement of a knee as it applies to prone handcuffing, correct?
Correct.
And ultimately, if that person were to be handcuffed and circumstances dictated, the officer would be permitted to continue to hold his knee in that same position. Agreed?
I would say yes. However, we've cautioned officers that be mindful of the neck area and to look for the shoulder for placement.
Perfect. We can take this down. Can we take that down, Your Honor? I'm going to show you what has been introduced as Exhibit 56 already. Can you see that, sir?
A little glare, but yes, sir.
It appears to be the
Sure. Yes, sir.
it appears to be the paramedic checking the carotid pulse of Mr. Floyd.
Yes, sir.
In your experience, this is already admitted as Exhibit 56. In your experience, would you be able to touch the carotid artery if the knee was placed on the carotid artery?
No, sir.
Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1045, 1045. Can you just generally take a look at that?
Yes, sir.
Now, in terms of, do you recognize that this appears to be a still photograph taken from the body-worn camera of one of the involved officers?
That's what it appears to be, yes.
There's a timestamp on it that indicates May 25th, 2020 at 20:23:32.
Yes, sir.
And can you see two officers in this area here holding Mr. Floyd?
Yes, sir.
And if I can clear this. Here, does that appear to be the placement of one officer's knee and leg?
Yes, sir.
Does that appear to be across the shoulder blade to the base of the neck?
The shin appears to be across the shoulder blade. I don't know if I can tell you where the knee is.
So we'll just, I would offer 1045.
Any objection? Foundationally, Your Honor,
Officer King.
No objection.
All right, 1045 is received.
Permission to publish. Could we clear that? Oh, okay. So what we're seeing here, again, this is at 8:23 and 32 seconds, correct?
Yes, sir.
And obviously, this is taken from one of the body cameras, and here you can see down in that area the leg placement of the officer, correct?
Yes, sir.
And based on your observation of this photograph, it appears that the shin is coming from the top of the shoulder across the shoulder blade, correct?
Yes, sir.
And appears to be at an angle pointed in towards the squad car, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. If we could take this down, Your Honor. Sorry, I'm missing. I think I accidentally closed. Hang on 1 second. Sure, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as 1046. Does that appear to be a similar angle?
Yes, sir.
And I apologize, it was actually Officer Lane's body-worn camera.
10:45.
1045 and 1046. Again, can you see what appears to be the placement of the leg of one of the officers at the shoulder blade of Mr. Floyd?
It appears so.
You can see in this area here what appears to be the back or the calf area coming across the shoulder blade, correct?
Yes, sir.
Again, the time stamp is 10:26 and 40 seconds.
Yes, sir.
And does that knee placement appear to be similar to how a Minneapolis, or excuse me, similar to the placement in the previous exhibit?
The last exhibit, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
And that was roughly a couple of minutes after, right?
Yes, sir.
I would offer exhibit 1046.
Just for clarification, did you say 10:26 and 46 seconds? You mean
8:26 and 40 seconds. 20, 26, 40.
No objection.
1046 is received.
Permission to publish. So again, it's a little hard to see in this particular photograph, but if we look in this general area here, correct, you can see the placement of the knee, correct?
I can see the general area of the placement of the knee, yes.
And again, here we have what appears to be the shin coming over the top of Mr. Floyd's shoulder blade,
That's what it appears, sir.
and that would be angled in towards the squad car, correct?
Correct.
You can take that down, Your Honor. Sir, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as Exhibit 1047. Does that also appear to be a still frame image taken from a body-worn camera of a Minneapolis police officer?
Yes, sir.
Timestamp being 8:27 and 49 seconds,
Yes, sir.
20:27:49, correct?
Correct.
And it appears that the officer wearing this body-worn camera has now stood up, correct?
It's a different angle, sir, yes.
From higher to lower, correct?
Lower to higher, sir?
It appears that the camera is at a higher angle, looking down.
Yes, sir.
And can you see in this photograph what appears to be the knee and shin placement of the officer?
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that it appears that the knee is placed in the center between Mr. Floyd's shoulder blades?
It appears to be between his shoulder blades, sir, yes.
I'd offer 1047.
Any objection?
Lane,
No objection.
1047 is received.
permission to publish. So again, here in this particular photograph, you can see the placement of Mr. Chauvin's knee in between the shoulder blades of Mr. Floyd, correct?
Yes, sir.
And it happens to be right here, that moment when the carotid artery is being palpated by the EMT.
Yes, sir.
We could take this down. Let me show you one last photograph, sir. Again, does this appear to be a photograph taken from, or a still frame image of a Minneapolis police body camera?
Yes, sir.
Time being 10, 28, and 29 seconds.
Yes, sir.
Excuse me, 20, 28, 29,
20, 28, 29, sir, yes.
which would be 8, 28, 29.
Correct.
And again, can you see the placement of Officer Chauvin's knee?
Yes, sir.
Can you see Mr. Floyd's head?
Yes, sir.
I'd offer 1048.
Any objection?
Yes, they're all linked.
No objection.
1048 is received.
Permission to publish? And again, it's a little hard to see here. You can see Mr. Floyd's head in that area,
Yes, sir.
and Mr. Chauvin, Officer Chauvin's knee between the shoulder blades of Mr. Floyd.
Yes, sir.
Does this appear to be a neck restraint?
No, sir.
Does this appear to be a prone hold that an officer may apply with his knee?
Yes.
You can take that down here. Now, you have talked about taking or holding a person in the prone position after they have stopped resisting. Do you recall talking about that?
Yes, sir.
And are there circumstances in your career where you have had to use your body weight to hold a suspect down for longer periods of time than, say, 2 or 3 seconds?
Yes, sir.
And are there times where you have had to use your body weight to hold a suspect down for 10 minutes?
I'm not sure if I would have held somebody down for 10 minutes or not. I don't have a recollection of that, sir.
Is it possible?
Yes, it's possible.
And there are circumstances, again, that an officer has to take into consideration in terms of continuing to use their body weight regardless of whether the person is resisting or not resisting, right?
Rephrase that?
Sure. Sometimes an officer has called for EMS, correct?
That's correct.
And sometimes an officer may hold a person using their body weight to restrain them, awaiting the arrival of EMS, correct?
Yes, sir.
You've done that yourself?
I have.
And sometimes you've had to, or was it fair to say that you've had to train officers to use their body weight to continue holding them until EMS arrives?
As long as needed to control them, yes.
You would agree that a scene where force has been used and a crowd congregates and is voicing their displeasure or their concern or whatever you want to say, that can be a chaotic situation for an officer, right?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree also that what you train Minneapolis police officers to do, relevant to their use of force, is to consider the totality of the circumstances. Agreed?
Yes, sir.
And you train officers that the decision to use force is from their perspective,
Yes, sir.
not the perspective, hindsight being 20/20.
That's correct.
That's the specific policy of Minneapolis Police Department.
I believe that's Graham versus Connor, sir.
That is encapsulated or incorporated into the Minneapolis Police Department policy on the use of force, correct?
Correct.
Because situations are rapidly evolving, correct?
That's correct.
And sometimes just because an incident is 10 minutes long or 20 minutes long, that doesn't mean that it can't instantaneously change.
That's correct.
Right? What may not be a threat 1 second can be a threat the next.
Correct.
Have you ever been trained or trained others to say that if a person can talk, they can breathe?
It's been said, yes.
In terms of the continuation of the use of force, right? Or excuse me, not the use of the continuation. The graphic that we looked at in Exhibit 110. If we could just publish Exhibit 110, Your Honor. This is the Defense Control and Response Training Guide, correct?
That's correct.
Simply because a person is not actively resisting, right? That doesn't mean you can't use some degree of force, correct?
That's correct.
If a person is passively resisting, you can still use certain types of force, right?
Yes, sir.
That's down in this area here, correct?
Correct.
And that would include the use of joint manipulation, escort holds, pressure points, correct?
Yes, sir.
We could take that down here. Sorry, we could take it down. You were asked a series of questions about the strike chart and the neck, the red, yellow, and green zones.
Yeah, it's called the Monadnock chart, sir. Yes, for striking.
That chart is designed specifically for punches, baton strikes, things of that nature, correct?
That's where we use that graph, yes.
In terms of the maximal restraint technique, you were describing the use of the maximal restraint technique.
Yes, sir.
And again, officers are trained to sometimes escalate the use of force in certain circumstances, correct?
Yes.
And de-escalate the use of force in certain circumstances.
Yes, sir.
If an officer decides initially to use the maximal restraint technique and then subsequently decides against it because of a medical situation or because of a lack of resistance, or would that be a de-escalation of the use of force?
Yes.
Is it more or less difficult to render medical aid if someone is in the maximal restraint technique?
I would say it was probably a little bit more difficult to maneuver around that.
You would not be able to put them on their back, for example.
It would be difficult, sir, yes.
In terms of the use of force, part of the ground defense program is actually to use body weight as a form of de-escalation, is it not?
Yeah, it's use of force that may be used instead of higher escalations of force, yes.
But sometimes holding someone in a position can be a de-escalating technique.
Yes, sir.
And ultimately, again, in terms of the use of force and deciding how much force should be used, the difference in size of an officer to a subject is a consideration,
It is a consideration, yes.
as well as the presence of other officers, right?
Yes, sir.
You would agree that basically the use of force in any circumstance is incredibly dependent upon the situation.
Yes, sir.
And when an officer is using force, they are to employ the critical decision-making model, correct?
They should be using that at all times.
But including the use of force.
Yes, sir.
And that critical decision-making model is not simply focused exclusively on the subject of the force being used, correct?
It's a situational awareness tool.
And the situational awareness extends beyond just the subject.
That's correct.
It extends to numerous factors.
Correct.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Swisher.